Welcome to the debate, and welcome to episode 03 of the Echoed Araz podcast. Today we are looking at a case that honestly defies physical logic.
It really does. It's the deeply unsettling February 1999 disappearance of Paul Skiba, his 9-year-old daughter Sarah, and his employee Lorenzo Chivers.
Right, out in Westminster, Colorado. Imagine this. 3 people walk into a sealed commercial moving truck. Multiple gunshots are fired. Catastrophic, localized trauma occurs.
Yeah, but when forensic investigators process that space, weeks later, the physical evidence tells an impossible story. Only 2 people were inside.
Exactly. How does a grown man completely vanish from a confined, violently kinetic crime scene? So let's establish the facts here. Paul Skiba, who was 38, owned a local business called Tuffy Movers. He took Sarah, who was just visiting for the weekend, and Lorenzo out for a moving job.
And none of those 3 were ever seen alive again.
No, they weren't. 3 weeks later, the Tuffy Movers commercial box truck is found abandoned, and it was parked in the company's own parking lot, of all places.
Which is bizarre.
Completely. And the inside of that cargo area was just a horrific scene. Investigators documented bullet holes piercing the aluminum walls, spent shell casings on the floor, and significant amounts of biological material.
Including human scalp tissue.
Right, which DNA testing later confirmed belonged to Paul and Sarah Skiba.
Yes.
But there was absolutely zero trace of Lorenzo Chivers' DNA in that truck. None. Furthermore, highly specific logistical items were missing from the vehicle. The heavy metal moving ramp, the ratcheting straps, and the thick moving blankets.
And that combination, the missing DNA and those missing logistical tools, that forms the fault line of our debate today. I'll be arguing that the absence of a person's DNA simply indicates they weren't the target of the localized trauma. The removal of that heavy lifting equipment actually points to a coordinated third-party ambush, where Lorenzo was a third victim abducted and disposed of by a highly organized killer.
And I will be arguing that the biological vacuum regarding Lorenzo, when you evaluate it alongside the precise removal of professional moving equipment, points directly to his active involvement. The physical mechanics of the crime scene suggest he orchestrated the violence and used his specialized knowledge of the trade to execute the cleanup and transport the evidence.
Well, let's begin with the physical reality of the cargo area, because the spatial environment really dictates the forensic outcome here.
Absolutely. Let's analyze the physical dynamics of a gunshot in a highly confined space. When a projectile strikes a human target, it doesn't just create a forward trajectory of biological material. The sudden expansion of gases and the kinetic energy create high-velocity backspatter.
Right, atomizing blood and tissue into a microscopic mist.
Exactly. It travels backward toward the source. Now put that kinetic event inside the back of a commercial box truck. You aren't just dealing with primary spatter, you're dealing with secondary ricochets. A bullet strikes corrugated aluminum and deflects, taking biological material with it.
It acts almost like a centrifuge.
Yes, a forensic fishbowl. The violent kinetic energy forces trace evidence outward, lodging it into the microscopic grooves of the metal walls, the tracking rails, the floorboards. If 3 people are standing in that centrifuge and catastrophic trauma occurs, it defies physical logic for one person to remain biologically untouched. If Lorenzo was a victim inside that truck, or, even an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire, he would have shed DNA.
I come at it from a different way. You are assuming a static, clustered formation where all 3 individuals are standing shoulder to shoulder in the cargo area at the exact millisecond the firearm is discharged.
Well, they were a crew.
Sure, but the sequence of an ambush does not conform to a neat geometric arrangement. Think about the operational layout of a commercial move. Someone operates the cab, someone manages the exterior latch, someone organizes the interior load. If an assailant approaches, the tactical imperative is to divide and conquer.
Wait, I need to pause you there. Look, I understand wiping down fingerprints or escaping a primary splatter zone if you're 50 feet away. But if Lorenzo is anywhere near that vehicle, say held at gunpoint just outside the tailgate, or standing 2 feet away from a gunshot inside the box,
how exactly does he avoid microscopic tissue spatter? Is that physically possible, or are we just making excuses to fit a third-party theory?
It is entirely physically possible if we contextualize the limitations of forensic science in 1999. You are applying modern trace-level touch DNA expectations to a late 90s crime scene.
Oh, elaborate on that distinction.
Well, in 1999, forensic processing relied heavily on RFLP analysis and early PCR techniques. Investigators needed substantial, visible biological material to extract a usable profile, a concentrated pool of blood, visible tissue fragmentation, or a distinct fluid transfer.
Right, touch DNA was in its absolute infancy.
Exactly. The microscopic transfer of epithelial skin cells left merely by grasping a steering wheel, that wasn't what they were looking for. Investigators processing that truck were swabbing visible stains in the cargo area.
Okay, but still.
So if Lorenzo was terrified, perhaps held at gunpoint in the driver's seat while the violence occurred in the back, he wouldn't leave a macroscopic blood stain. He might have left a microscopic skin cell transfer on the dash, but the forensic sweep was focused on the catastrophic trauma in the rear. The absence of his blood in the forensic report does not equal the absence of his physical person at the scene.
I think that misinterprets the rigor applied to this specific vehicle. The cargo area wasn't just casually swabbed. It was processed as a structurally complex triple homicide scene. If Lorenzo was bleeding, struggling, or physically attacked anywhere near that truck, the markers would be there. The biological vacuum strongly suggests he was the one holding the firearm, standing safely behind the kinetic expansion of the weapon, or wearing protective clothing.
Let's test that logic by looking at the actual mechanism of body disposal, though, because this is where the physical evidence speaks the loudest. The missing heavy-duty ramp, the ratcheting straps, the thick moving blankets.
The logistical tools, yes.
These are highly specific items. A moving blanket is exceptionally thick and absorbent. It's designed to prevent furniture from scratching, but functionally, it's perfect for wrapping a body experiencing post-mortem bleeding to prevent seepage during transit. A third-party killer ambushes the crew, realizes they have a massive logistical problem, and suddenly sees a mobile disposal kit. They adapt the moving truck into a hearse.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, honestly, anyone who has ever rented a moving van can figure out how to drape a blanket. What they cannot figure out on the fly, in the dark, under extreme psychological stress, is the commercial ramp.
But it pulls out from under the chassis. It's just a sliding piece of metal.
It is absolutely not that simple. We need to detail the mechanics of heavy-duty commercial truck equipment. This isn't a lightweight aluminum U-Haul ramp. It weighs well over 100 pounds.
Right, it's industrial.
Yes, it is locked underneath the chassis with a specialized spring-loaded latching mechanism that requires simultaneous pushing, twisting, and pulling just to disengage it. You have to slide it out perfectly straight on its tracking rails. If you pull it at even a 5-degree angle, the steel binds and locks up completely.
Which can be frustrating, sure.
Very. And once extended, you have to physically deadlift the end and hook the heavy metal prongs securely onto a specific structural lip on the truck bed. Fail to set those prongs perfectly, and the ramp collapses the second you put weight on it.
Which suggests a learning curve, certainly.
It suggests a severe operational barrier. Add in the ratcheting straps. If you thread a heavy-duty commercial strap backward, the internal gear jams permanently. Think about the cognitive dissonance required for this third-party killer theory. A random killer has to be panicked enough to hijack a commercial truck to hide bodies, but calm, organized, and experienced enough to perfectly deploy and then perfectly restow a 100-pound commercial ramp, thread heavy-duty ratchets in the dark without jamming them, and parallel park the vehicle back in the victim's own assigned company parking space 3 weeks later.
That's a compelling point, but I think you're underestimating the sheer physical labor involved here, which actually undermines the single perpetrator theory. Paul Skiba was a fully grown adult male. Lorenzo Chivers was a grown man.
True.
Moving two deadweight adult bodies plus a child is an agonizingly strenuous physical task. It requires immense exertion. If Lorenzo is a sole perpetrator executing this cleanup by himself in the dead of winter, how is he lifting his boss's dead weight out of that truck without leaving a massive trail of sweat, skin cells, and microscopic evidence of his own physical exhaustion.
Oh, I see.
Right? The biomechanical exertion alone would compromise the biological vacuum you're relying on.
Unless he had assistance. I mean, I'm not suggesting Lorenzo necessarily acted in total isolation. If he orchestrated this with associates, the outside help provides the physical muscle, while Lorenzo provides the specialized operational knowledge of the truck's equipment.
But then we are inventing invisible accomplices to make the theory function. The simpler, more structurally sound explanation is a coordinated ambush by multiple third-party assailants who targeted Paul Skiba, took control of the entire crew, and utilized the tools at hand to dispose of all three individuals. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people working in logistics, construction, or freight who know how to operate a sliding ramp and a ratchet strap. The usage of those tools does not narrow the suspect pool down to one specific employee.
Fair enough. Let's shift from the physical mechanics to the behavioral timeline then. Because if we look at how law enforcement originally reacted, they didn't treat Lorenzo as a victim of an ambush.
You mean initially, when they vanished?
Yes. When Sarah failed to return to her mother from her scheduled weekend visitation, the police didn't open a random third-party attack investigation. They immediately suspected Paul and Lorenzo of kidnapping her.
Well, in family law situations, parental kidnapping is a statistical default. When a child misses a custody handoff, law enforcement looks at the custodial parent first. That is standard operating procedure.
The focus on the father is standard, the inclusion of the employees the anomaly. Law enforcement suspected that father and the employee acting together. That early investigative instinct indicates there may have been pre-existing behavioral red flags or tension between the employer and employee that raised immediate alarm bells for the family or the police.
That is an interesting distinction.
Right? The fact that Lorenzo was viewed as a potential co-conspirator in a kidnapping before a single drop of blood was found tells us he was not viewed purely as a passive, loyal subordinate.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that those initial instincts were formed in a total vacuum of physical evidence? They suspected a kidnapping because they did not know a double or potentially triple homicide had taken place.
Because the truck was still missing.
Exactly. Once investigators introduce a truck bed full of bullet casings and catastrophic localized trauma, the entire paradigm shifts from a custody dispute to a violent execution.
But does it shift the primary suspect? Or just the severity of the crime? Let's examine the ultimate location of the truck, because this is perhaps the most glaring behavioral contradiction. 3 weeks after the disappearance, the Tuffy Movers truck is found abandoned right back in the Tuffy Movers parking lot.
Which points entirely away from an employee. Look at the risk assessment of that action. If Lorenzo is the perpetrator, he knows his face is on local news broadcasts. He knows law enforcement is actively hunting for his boss's commercial vehicle.
Yeah.
Why would he take the uncalculated suicidal risk of driving a structurally complex crime scene back to his own company's commercial lot? A guilty employee fleeing the state or trying to build an alibi would torch the vehicle in a remote desert area or push it into a reservoir to destroy the biological evidence. They wouldn't return to the epicenter of the investigation.
I think that misinterprets the psychology of the perpetrator. A company truck parked in a company lot isn't a panic move. It is calculated camouflage.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. It's the definition of hiding in plain sight. If a perpetrator dumps a bloody commercial moving van in a random residential neighborhood, a homeowner calls it in as an anomalous abandoned vehicle within 72 hours. By returning the truck to its assigned designated spot in a commercial lot, the killer bought themselves a 3-week head start. No one looked twice at it because it belonged there.
But hiding in plain sight only works if the vehicle remains unexamined. The physical act of returning it is astronomically dangerous for a known employee. If another Tuffy Movers employee or a neighboring security guard spots Lorenzo Chivers exiting that missing truck, the camouflage fails instantly.
I guess that's true, but
However, a third-party killer, someone completely unassociated with the Westminster area or the local personnel, might just look at the logo on the door, find the dress on a clipboard in the cab, and dump it back where it came from simply to get it off their hands.
Or the company lot wasn't just a dumping ground, it was a point of origin.
Ah, that is a critical structural theory.
Right?
We know they went out for a job, but what if they were intercepted upon their return to the lot later that evening?
A killer waits in the dark at the commercial facility. They ambush Paul, Sarah, and Lorenzo as they're finishing their shift and exiting the cab. The violence occurs in the cargo area.
And then they leave.
Right, the killer drives the truck to a secondary location, disposes of the bodies using the ramp and blankets, and then simply drives the truck back to the exact lot where they originally parked their own getaway vehicle. The lot wasn't a strategic hiding place. It was simply the killer's starting and ending point. This perfectly explains why the truck was returned there without requiring Lorenzo to take an inexplicable risk.
If the commercial lot was the point of origin and a third-party ambush occurred there, it still forces us to reconcile the forensics. Even in a dark parking lot ambush, the separation of DNA remains staggering. We keep circling back to this because it is the immovable object in the data. Paul and Sarah's biological material is present in catastrophic ways. Lorenzo's is absent.
Lorenzo Chivers was a 36-year-old man who went to work one morning and walked into an ambush. To look at the absence of his blood and conclude that he must be the orchestrator is honestly a failure of forensic imagination.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was disposed of just as callously as Paul and Sarah. His body was simply hidden as effectively as theirs. The appropriation of the specific moving equipment shows a killer who is adaptable and logistically minded. The audacity of returning the vehicle to the company lot demonstrates an assailant who is cold, calculating, and completely unconcerned with being recognized at the headquarters precisely because they are a stranger to it.
It is the ultimate forensic paradox. We have a spatial environment that acts as a ledger, but the physical ink only records the trauma of a father and a daughter.
Yeah.
To summarize my position, the total lack of Lorenzo's DNA amidst a violent, confined-based kinetic event, combined with his unquestionable professional expertise regarding the missing heavy-duty moving equipment, makes him the most logical, evidence-based suspect. The physical mechanics of the cleanup point to a perpetrator who knew exactly how to use the specific tools at hand and how to avoid the forensic spatter zone.
And to summarize my position, a lack of microscopic biological material only proves a lack of localized injury, not a presence of guilt. The missing heavy lifting equipment and the sheer biomechanical exertion required to move multiple bodies point to an organized external threat. The geometry of leaving the truck in the company lot is the signature of a ruthless third-party killer who utilized the crew's gear and disposed of Lorenzo Chivers just as permanently as he did Paul and Sarah Skiba.
Both of these perspectives force us to confront the chilling reality of that cold February night in 1999. Without the recovery of the bodies, the physical contradictions of the Skiba case remain unresolved. There are layers of complexity, behavioral psychology, and forensic mechanics here that challenge our fundamental understanding of crime scene reconstruction.
The source material surrounding this triple disappearance is incredibly dense, and we've really only scratched the surface of the timelines, the family dynamics, and the subsequent investigations. There is so much more to explore in the material, and the answers may still be out there, waiting for the right piece of physical evidence to finally emerge and clarify the sequence of events.
It all circles back to that aluminum box, a centrifuge of kinetic energy that recorded too much of one tragedy and none of another. We deliberately leave the core mystery open-ended to provoke critical thinking and debate among you, our listeners. We leave it to you to weigh the evidence, analyze the mechanics of the missing tools, and decide for yourself what really happened in the back of that truck.
So please drop your theories in the comments below. We would love to read them.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Thank you for listening.